Divorce happens. In fact, it happens to almost 50% of first marriages. So let's talk about it. Welcome to Divorce Happens, a podcast to educate, inspire, support, and yes, make you laugh through divorce and beyond so that you can start fresh on the next phase of your journey. Remember, divorce happens, and then we start fresh.
You get divorced. You get divorced.
Getting divorced?
I'm getting a divorce.
You're getting a divorce.
Because she's getting a divorce.
So what if I get divorced?
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Divorce Happens, the show where we support you before, during, and after divorce with education, inspiration, and a little bit of laughter. Because as you know, divorce happens and then you start fresh. This is the third episode of a 4-part series that is really essential if you are considering mediation. The series is what we like to call Everything You Need to Know About Mediation, with Allison McFadden, who is one of our amazing experts. The first episode was an overview of mediation. That's 2 episodes back. You can go listen to that. The one before this was how to prep for mediation. And today, Allison is going to walk us through what it looks like to be in mediation. So take it away, Allison.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to get into this because I think this is a mystery for a lot of folks. If you haven't actually been in a mediation session before, I think for a lot of people, it's a big question mark. Like, what happens inside that room or rooms, right? So being able to feel comfortable, being able to have an idea of what's happening in the process can give you that confidence that you need to really advocate and negotiate and have a productive mediation. So one big thing that I think is important is talking to your mediator before that first mediation session to get an understanding of how they run mediation, because it's a very customizable process. Different people do things differently. And so while I'm going to speak generally to what I think most folks do and talk maybe specifically a little bit about my process, there are other folks out there who do things, have a different process, or might run their mediation session differently. But hopefully by listening to this episode, you'll at least know like the questions to ask, right? So even if they do things differently, you have an understanding of what to ask about and how to prepare for mediation.
That's super helpful. It's always good to know what questions to ask because you just don't know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so take us from beginning to end here. What does it look like to be in mediation?
Sure. So like Olivia said, in the last episode, we talked about preparing for mediation, right? So definitely listen to that episode because preparation is key to having a productive mediation. Because one of the first things that's going to happen at the beginning of mediation, after, there might be, the mediator might kind of generally run through what's going to happen, ask if there's any questions, kind of do that like introduction. But then they're likely to turn it over to the parties and start asking, what do you want to talk about? What are you here to discuss today? And you don't want to be caught flat-footed, right? You want to be prepared to speak about what your goals are, what your intentions are, what's important to you, your values, and be prepared to speak on that if the mediator gives you that opportunity to address that at the beginning. You're likely to have a mediator run through the different topics with you that you need to discuss. So once you've kind of had that introduction from the mediator, once there's been a space for the parties, the mediation participants, to share what's important to them and what they're there to discuss, as a mediator, you're likely to kind of set the agenda. You want to know, what all do we need to discuss here? Let's get everything out on the table first. And so what I do when I'm doing mediations as part of my initial call with clients is I give them a checklist of the issues that commonly come up during divorce and co-parenting mediation. There's specific issues that come up during that initial call with them. I might send them some additional documents. But what I'm going to do as part of that mediation session as the mediator is start running through that checklist and simply identifying with them what topics we need to cover, what applies to them. If they don't own a house, then we check that off, we cross that off the list, right? We don't need to talk about that. You have 2 kids who are in elementary school. All right, we need to talk about parenting plan terms. Which of these terms are important? And we're really trying to do it in a neutral way. So I'm not asking people, how do you want to resolve this topic? Or what do you think would be best? We're really just trying to get an understanding of everything that needs to be discussed so that we can come up with this list of topics. And then from there, we can start going through what topics we want to be discussed first. Oftentimes it makes sense. We can't talk about what to do with the house until we figured out a schedule for the kids. Everything's interwoven, right? So we're going through the different topics and seeing if we can't come to agreement on some of these different issues. And like I always tell people, when I say come to an agreement, it's a tentative agreement. We're talking through things. It's not written down in stone yet. Nobody's signed off on it. This is a conversation to see how we can maybe resolve some of these issues. And then as we start getting to potentially an agreement on some of these topics, that's where I start taking notes. As the mediator, I'm going to start noting the areas where we have agreement. I'm going to start noting areas where maybe we don't have enough information. So maybe somebody we're talking about dividing retirement, right? And we came to mediation and neither spouse knows how much is in their retirement accounts. So they both need to go and maybe get some documents before the next mediation session. So I'm making note of that so that we can have a list, right, that keeps us organized because oftentimes we aren't able to address everything in that first mediation session. We're going to have to schedule a second mediation session. We might have to schedule a third. And so we want to be clear. We want to be efficient. We don't want to be rehashing things that don't need to. We want to make sure at the next mediation session, we are showing up as prepared as possible. So going through and making notes on the different things that we're discussing. And what I usually do, again, every mediator is differently, but at the end of that mediation session, I'll send out my notes, which are just very basic, so that everybody's on the same page, so that it reminds people if they need to provide account statements, if they need to get an appraisal of the house, that everybody's on the same page about what's going to be happening before that next mediation session.
That's super helpful. Can you explain a little bit, I guess, about the logistics of what it looks like to be in that mediation session, kind of Zoom and in person, if people are maybe doing both?
Yeah. So usually, if we're on a Zoom or whether we're in person, I generally start with everybody in the same room. I think it's really helpful for people to get to hear each other directly, at least at first. I think it's more efficient. But there might become a point in time where things do get heated or where there needs to be either a break or there needs to be an opportunity to use breakout rooms. So using breakout rooms or Zoom, or if we're in person physically, going into a separate room to speak to the mediator privately, to speak to an attorney privately, if you've brought like a support person or something like that. Being able to utilize kind of like that private space and then maybe come back to that shared space. Or sometimes the mediator might then kind of bounce back and forth, right?
Mm.
So the parties or the people who are in mediation are in separate rooms, and the mediator is going back and forth between the two. And for some mediators, that's kind of more their default, right? They're more comfortable going back and forth between the parties. My default is usually to try to keep people in the room as
Yeah.
long as possible, unless and until there are certainly, times when it makes sense to go into separate rooms. But I think, especially when folks don't have attorneys, it's really supposed to be a conversation between the two of them. And I also view mediation as an opportunity for folks to learn how to have some of these conversations
Mm.
that they're going to have to keep, especially if you have kids, you're going to have to keep having these conversations. And so
Yeah.
being able to speak to each other or at least talk through some of these topics, it's an opportunity to build those skills too. And if you aren't in the same room, you're missing out on that opportunity. So when possible, being in the same room is how I generally operate. But there's definitely times when breakout rooms are utilized or when, it might make more sense to operate that way.
I didn't even know that was a possibility, to be honest with you. Like, I always just assumed everybody was in the same room.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. One question I get in my DMs a lot, Allison, is what do I wear to something like this?
Oh, yeah. That's a really good question, Olivia.
Yeah.
So I would say be comfortable. You don't generally need to be super fancy. I think it also might depend a little bit on like what the setting is. Sometimes when you go to mediation, it might actually be at the courthouse, right?
Mm.
So you might feel a little bit more comfortable being a little bit more dressed up. But I think generally, that's something that what you feel most comfortable in, what you generally wear on a day-to-day basis. I don't think you need to get dressed up. The mediator is supposed to be there as a neutral. They're not supposed to be judging you based off of what you're wearing, right? But I can
Uh-huh.
certainly understand, that's often a question that comes up in
Yeah.
terms of court too. Like, what do
Yeah.
I wear to court, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I don't think there's any run right answer. I think just kind of using the guidelines of be comfortable, something that you would wear, business casual to
That's
work
yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah. That's usually what I say too. Yeah.
I would also say I don't I really don't judge I mean I some people are showing up like they're taking a break from work and so they're in their work uniform, right? At mediation
Mm,
I always say like we take people as they come, take
I love
people as
that.
they are.
Yeah. Yeah. I did my mediation on Zoom after bedtime. So I was definitely not my best
You want to
professional
be
self.
comfy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, so when you go through the session, you're finished with the session, let's say, what is the follow-up and how do you know if you need more sessions?
So I usually, when we're getting towards the end of the session, we talk about what's the next steps. Are we going to set in that next session at before we end so that even if it's just a placeholder that maybe we have to reschedule, sometimes it can be good to get that date on the calendar. Make sure everybody's, doing the things they said they needed to do, keeping the conversation moving forward. So we're going to talk about at the end of the mediation what the game plan is going forward, what everybody's going to do. If we've at that point, if we've reached an agreement on all the issues, then as the mediator, I draft up the written agreement for the parties to review. And so if we're at that point, I let them know that I'll be drafting it and I'll be sending it to them. I don't have people sign things like on the day of mediation. My philosophy is that generally people a divorce agreement, a parenting plan, it's going to have terms in it that they might not fully understand, comprehend. And so having the opportunity to review it with an attorney or to really take the time and go through it line by line, I think is important for people to understand what they're signing off on so that they follow the agreement, right?
Yeah.
Somebody signs off on something that they didn't realize they were agreeing to, it's not as likely that they're going to follow the agreement. And we want these
Mm,
agreements to be durable, to be followed so that you stay out of court.
that's a really good point, Allison. Um, for anybody listening that feels super nervous about the process, do you have experiences in mediation as a mediator where it's just like chill, like it's not like so dramatic?
Yeah. I often say people are on their best behavior when they come to mediation. So I think oftentimes issues that people thought might get really elevated or that people might get really angry about, it does happen, right? These issues, sometimes it does get heated. But I think that oftentimes people are, like I said, they're on their best behavior. If they're paying to be there, if this is a private mediation, or if the court ordered them to be there and they have to pay for it, they're paying to be there. And so I think generally coming in, most people are coming in with the idea that, like, let's make the most of this and see if we can't reach an agreement.
Yeah.
And at least making that good faith effort to try and find some common ground.
Do you ever laugh in mediation?
Absolutely. Yep. I have to say some of the mediations are almost, I don't want to say happy, but I certainly work with folks that are friends, that their divorce is not something that they view as like a horrible ending of their marriage, but more so like they're figuring out their next chapter together. And so it can
Uh,
actually be really, really collaborative and an opportunity for them to kind of, it wasn't necessarily the future that they had talked about or planned for, but they can figure out that different future together. And so it can also be, I think, a good way to kind of have those conversations that might not otherwise happen that can bring some closure to
Yeah.
the end of the relationship.
I love that. I love that. Perfect way to end the episode. Super, super helpful. So much information in this episode. Please re-listen if you need it again and send it to somebody who's considering mediation. We always recommend mediation first, so try that before anything else, and lots of info in these episodes. Allison's info will be in the links in the show notes, and of course, you can find her at Fresh Starts. The last episode in this series, which will come right after this episode, is what to do after mediation and everything else. Go listen to episode 1, which is the overview, episode 2, which is how to prep, and then this one is all about everything in mediation. Allison, this is so helpful. I'm learning a ton from you today. So if you are considering mediation, absolutely essential to listen to these episodes. We will see you next time on what to do after mediation. Divorce Happens is produced by Fresh Starts Registry, the only divorce registry platform for everything you need to begin again, including home items, hype team, and everything in between. Remember, divorce happens, and then we start fresh. We're here to support you before, during, and after divorce. Head to freshstartsregistry.com for more info.